Hello and welcome to Gabbett Media. I'm Grant Abbott and today we are working on retopology once again. This time I'm giving you a detailed breakdown of how I would go about retopologizing this dragon's head. It's a very long tutorial with lots of detail. The whole process did actually take 3 hours, so there is parts of this time-lapsed, but other parts where I do break it down and go into exactly what I'm doing. Once again, remember to check out my website and the playlists in the description and the playlists on the channel for more free courses and detailed guides about what I'm talking about. Also, make sure you check out my character course if you haven't already. So here's what we got up to last time, and let's start with the horns. I'm doing this the same way I did the neck, so turning off the modifiers and then adding a cylinder, and then I'm moving it into position. This time I'm going to go a little bit closer and make sure it lines up a bit more perfectly. If I need to select my object, I'll press L and that will select those individual sort of islands, and I can easily then move them into position. I'm deleting half the face because it will be mirrored, and then just moving these edges close to the object. And for this bit I'll turn the mirror back on so that I can easily resize in the x-axis. So G then X, to make sure it's not overlapping here. Lastly, I need to fill in a face at the end here. So I'll take these two edges here and E to extrude until it makes a quad here, and then E to extrude again into the middle. I can then select this face, F and F, and I've got a nice quad mesh that should work fine. Same with the bottom here, F and F. Now before I shrink wrap, I might as well use the same horn for other things. And rather than keep applying the shrink wrap to the whole mesh, just in case that causes problems, I can press L on this and separate it as an object. So P to separate. Control X to delete some of the edge loops because this horn's a bit smaller, and then just reposition it as I see fit. This one's a separate object, so it does have its own mirror around this point here. It does actually have its own shrink wrap as well, and it's worth just considering that when you're doing your horn, which actually is going around here, so I might just apply the mirror in a moment and move it all around. So in this case I can apply the mirror at this point so I can start adapting the shape a bit closer. I'm using the local x-axis, and this is something you get used to as you get more experience, which modifiers to apply and when to re-add them and so on. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, remember, because the shrink wrap modifier will push it into place. You've just got to make sure that nothing inserts into the mesh, or that it's too close to another bit of the mesh so it will shrink wrap to that instead. So I'll duplicate this one and use it for this horn. And that one's relatively quick because it's a sort of similar shape and you just have to get the rough area. So I'll quickly show the process once again. So this is a separate object now. I can enable the shrink wrap once again and you can see how it's working there. And then I can apply that shrink wrap modifier. It does get an error message because the mirror is above it in order, but that doesn't make too much difference. With that mesh selected, select the original mesh as well with Shift and Control J to join. And now it's joined to the original mesh. I can go in and start modifying it and syncing it up nice and easily. So the same for this one. This one hasn't got a mirror modifier, but I'll turn on the shrink wrap. Still works okay. It's a little bit of an error here, which I can tidy up probably by doing just another loop cut around here, and we can see the shrink wrap working nicely. Back into object mode, apply that shrink wrap modifier, and then join it to the other one. So with this selected, select the middle object, Control J to join, and you'll notice it appears on the other side because our original mesh has a mirror modifier. So I'm going to speed up the process of the other horns so you can get an idea of what I'm doing, but we can get on to the other face structure as well. Same process, duplicating a horn, putting it into position, just moving things around and making sure they don't touch, overlap, and then applying the shrink wraps. So you can just reapply, you can add them, take them away. It doesn't make too much difference as long as things are sticking and working, and when you put it all together, you have that shrink wrap and the mirror enabled as the kind of finished result. So there's kind of lots of chopping and changing and reapplying, adding the modifiers, but you get used to that as you go through. It's not a completely necessary step, but I find it speeds up the process. So in some cases your topology might be too detailed, so because I've copied from this one here and the one above it, it doesn't really need to be that dense, and I might reduce some of these as well, but I can go around selecting loop cuts and Control X to dissolve, and that's a much tighter topology, and we can see how that goes when I add the shrink wrap. So with that object, let's see what it looks like with the shrink wrap. It's not too bad. We might just need to smarten up and maybe put a loop cut in here. I'll just GG to edge slide, and this one as well, GG to edge slide, and move it up, and I think that's good enough topology. So the same thing again for something like this one, into edit mode, and I can look at areas where I can get rid of the loop cuts, so here and here, Control X to dissolve. It's tricky to get rid of these because of the quad based mesh. We'll see how it goes with this. Often it is the case that you have to sort of leave something and come back to it once you've kind of got the rest of the mesh in and you're seeing how things are linking up. This one's a little bit tougher, as you can see, bits are sticking out, but we can probably get away with it. I still haven't got snapping turned on for all these bits yet. It might need another loop down there, but we'll see as we go through. This one's a bit tougher because it's in the middle and it's got a mirror, so I'm not going to use this one after all. I'll use this one up here. So that's obviously joined to the whole dragon. I can go into edit mode, link select that, and duplicate it with Shift D, just move it out the way there, and then come to side view and rotate it into position. And I've just separated it to make it a little bit easier. So I've joined all these objects together, and you can see that the shrink wrap is slightly different when applied and not applied. So I'm actually going to apply the shrink wrap once again, and then add the shrink wrap, and then add a new shrink wrap. But sometimes if you have any issues, you can just apply the shrink wrap and then add a new one to make sure that it's all stuck on top of the object correctly. So that's all the horns finished. Now on to the rest of the head. It's a good idea to hide any elements such as the teeth that might get in the way. You can also duplicate just the vertex and extrude that out as you see fit. Now what I've done there is I forgot to turn snapping back on, so my mesh is actually quite far away from the object and then it's sticking with the shrink wrap. So just remember, you must re-enable your snapping, and it's a combination of snapping and the shrink wrap that works really nicely. Remember to put your on cage option on as well. I actually decided to go back to faces here because I found it a little bit easier. I made a very slight mistake here. I forgot to put on the snapping mode to on surface, so it was cutting into the mesh quite a lot and flickering, which was a bit of a pain. So do make sure in your shrink wrap modifier you have above surface, not on surface. Now when modeling, you've got to be a little bit careful of big blobby areas coming through your mesh like this. There's some here, one just there, and you can see in this horn here as well. So in this horn, that's fairly easy. I can probably do another loop cut around here and just snap that out slightly and bring some of these in. And it may be that I need to create another loop cut around here. You do just have to go in and select the verts to make sure they do snap above the surface. You can have a tiny bit of overlap, so the base mesh coming through the original mesh, but try and keep it to a minimum, and that might be an indication that you need more topology in that area. So there's obviously a lot of undulation in the face here that we need to check on. So this bit, for example, if I move these across slightly and do another loop cut in here, here's an interesting example. So if I fill this face in here with F, it's actually working out quite nicely and following the flow of our face, but if I fill in again, that's when I start getting problems. And that's where I might need to either try and grab this and move it into position so it overlaps slightly less, and we can probably get away with a shape like this without too many problems. If there's more problems, then I need to somehow figure out how I can get another edge flow in here, still keeping the quads, and that's where it gets a bit tricky. just realized I hadn't put it above surface. So if you're using on surface, you're going to get all this sort of weird flickering. So let's say I try and extrude this edge here. E to extrude, it flickers like this and it's a real pain. I've forgotten to put above surface. And now you can see when I start grabbing it, it moves so much easier, and it was giving me quite a headache, that was, as to what was going on. Okay, so somehow we need to link up here, but also link up in here. So that's a tricky one. We're going to need a pole somewhere around here. I'll probably fill this one in a bit first, and then a pole coming out from here would make sense. So I can select one and select these two verts and F to fill. There's no edge or face there, so I can't press J to join. It has to be fill. If I'm going from here to here, there's already a face in there, and I can press J to join. And I can't select on this edge and hope to fill this in. With F, nothing happens, because there's no solidity the other side either. So I have to select these two, for example, and press F to fill. And then I can come in here and press F to fill on this side. Now that is quite a big area there. We might get away with it. And when I say might get away with it, it all depends on how well it bakes in the end. But it's quite a nice flat surface, so it's looking okay at the moment. The other bit is when we come to another piece of topology and we might end up needing a loop cut in there. So this, for example, seems to be matching up okay, so we can M to merge at center there, these two as well, M to merge at center, because they're matching up, but we need another cut in here. So Control R to loop cut, then we can go to edge mode, F to fill, and fill in around to here. We're probably going to have a pole here, so let's bring that down to the edge there, and I'm going to need another loop cut around here. Now ideally I don't want it going back up to here, but that does seem to be the sensible option. So it comes back around here, but we'll have some really tight vertices in there. It's not such a bad thing to do, but you can see it is getting a bit tight in there and possibly problematic. We'll see how we get on. Now a pole here is a little bit suspect because it's right on a point where the geometry changes course. So there's a crease in there. So it's not ideal. The same coming around here. There should be a loop cut coming around here ideally. So this is where I usually use the knife tool to tidy things up. K for knife and left click to cut. So to there. So I can just GG to edge slide and pull those in together. And GG to edge slide and bring them back. And GG to edge slide to bring that one back. But now we've got this big space in here. We've still got quads. We've got a nice loop going around here. And it's going to have to continue around here as well. So I'll just E to extrude that, E to extrude it in, but then we've got a triangle here. So you can see the types of issues you get when doing this sort of retopology. So first let's tidy this up, drag that across there with GG to edge slide, so we haven't got that triangle anymore, and we've got a loop going around there. Now let's go to the back of the horn again, and like I say, we don't want a pole there really. This loop cut should really meet where our dragon's horn meets the rest of the head, because there's an obvious crease there. So we want to do some edge sliding to bring this down so it becomes the base. So here's a good example of edge flow, how we need a loop cut where two objects meet and there's an obvious crease. And ideally you don't want any poles along that loop cut. The reason being, you can't add any supporting loops either side of it if you've got a pole. And if you wanted to crease that up further, you'd need supporting loops in order to do that. Okay, so that's good. We've got a loop cut going around here. Then I can press Control R and I can fill in more loops if necessary, and that's what you need with good topology. But it's not so good because we've got areas like this which are sticking through. So we might need to create some more space. So bringing these up so it's a smaller cut, bringing this out, and then we might need a pole just here. I can come from this vertex here, E to extrude, pull that out there, and coming out this way. So we've got a pole just there, and then I can fill these areas in and come up in here. And it is probably confusing what I'm saying here. It's complicated to try and explain this, but hopefully you're sort of understanding the ideas of what's going on here. It can be tricky here as well. We can't just fill this face in very easily. The way to do that is to kind of fill the next one down. So you E to extrude here, and then you can fill that face in because it's got three sides. It's always a tricky one when you come to the mirror in the center here. So I'm just trying to even these out a touch, and I think that looks a bit better for sort of even topology. Okay, so we have got another issue here, and I'm going to want to do a loop cut in here. to even out these, but then we've got a triangle here. In this case, I can bring these down, and do another cut just here. And that would just about work. That's one way of doing it. We've got a loop flow coming around here now and back up here, and that seems to work. Again, I'm constantly sort of grabbing the topology, make sure there's not too many of these lumps sticking through as I build the mesh up. There I grabbed a fairly straight line of edges and extruded them out and then filled in the faces between them. That's why I tend to steer clear of the polybrush tool. I find it awkward to work with that and do those sort of techniques. Now can you see there's a slight distortion in this particular face here, or this quad here, as the triangles sort of go round the corner. So we're probably going to need another loop cut going around the eye eventually. But at the moment, if I press Ctrl R, it follows the loop around the nose. So we need to make sure that these are linked up together so it forms a loop around here. And the best way to do that would be to come into here and to have them coming across this way and a pole somewhere either here or here. Now it can be, again, very confusing as to how that's done, so the easiest way is just to grab the knife tool and create the area that you want to start off with. So now we've got the loop cut going around here, but we've obviously got these tricky triangles. We know we don't want this one in here, so I'm going to Ctrl X to dissolve that, and then we've got a loop going around here, but we have this problem here where this loop comes down to here. We can't get rid of that because that would make these too big and we'd start seeing some of the inside mesh come through. It just wouldn't work. But perhaps we can come underneath here and round to this area here, because there's another pole here. We could maybe link in with that one. So I'll move this one down and see if we can't consider that. Maybe GG to edge slide those into each other, and then K to come across and around to here. Don't worry about this area here. We can just GG to edge slide and GG to edge slide that back, and now we've got some topology that seems to work. All that's left is to just get rid of this edge here with Ctrl X. Ctrl X is dissolve edges rather than just delete them, which will delete some of the faces around them. You might notice me miss an n-gon there, which I'll come back to shortly as I fill these bits in. Now obviously this isn't particularly tidy at the moment, so we'll need to go in and just tidy some of that up. And actually I've made a mistake there. I've got an n-gon here, but again that's fairly straightforward. We can just create a cut down here, and that actually helps to sort out the eye a little bit more. There's more that needs to be done around the eye here, and again take a sort of edge area, extrude down and move it into position. And you can go every other one if you want to do it sort of individually for more control, and then just fill those edges in between. Can get a bit fiddly with edges around these areas here, but when you get to these minute details, that's where the bump map will pick it up, or the normal map, rather than having to worry about getting perfect topology around there. Unless you're going for a really high poly mesh that maybe is used in films, then you'll want to be a bit tighter with your topology. But you can always start off doing big topology like this and then go in and start doing your loop cuts if you need to add detail. Eyes can be quite awkward, and when you get to the center here, you get as close as you can to that sort of area where it goes in, and then turn the shrink wrap off for a moment. So shrink wrap off, just making sure that everything is still above the surface. Select that inside edge loop, E to extrude, scale down. I've still got snapping turned on, so it's snapping to the eyeball at the moment, which is actually a fairly okay position for now. Turn snapping off, and at this point it can get pretty confusing. I find it easiest, come out of edit mode, hide our dragon mesh, hide the eyeball as well, and come into our mesh once again, and then we can extrude it inwards manually like this. Top view is probably easiest, and I'll scale it in the X just to even it out slightly, extrude it inwards again and scale it right down. So we're sort of getting an eye socket now. The problem is with doing this that when we go back to the shrink wrap in a moment, this is going to cause us problems. But it is helpful to have this mesh there so we can insert an eyeball that can move around and so forth. So we still want this mesh, but we just don't want it affected by the shrink wrap. Well, we can select those inside faces. I'm selecting the one right in the middle and Control+, and selecting all those faces on the inside of the eye out to here, and we can remove them from the vertex group that's affected by the shrink wrap. So if we come to the object data here, create a new vertex group, select the inverse of what we got selected, so Control I, and everything when we press assign will be affected by the shrink wrap. I'm going to press Control I and give this a new vertex group and call it I, just so we know it's there, and assign these faces. So if I deselect all with Alt A and I go to Group and press Select, should select everything but the eye, and then deselect, and the eye one, if I select that, it will select just the eye socket. So let's bring back the other meshes, so Alt H, and back into edit mode with our shape. Just check that this is all fine in terms of the vertex group, and actually we want this ring of vertices around here to be affected, so I do actually need to remove them from the eye. So select that ring that we don't want again, remove them from this one, Alt A just to double check, so I select, and it's just got those inside faces there, that's good. Deselect all and then try and select the group one, that's good. I'm just going to call this dragon so it's quite clear, there's the rest of the dragon, there's the eye socket that's not affected. Now when we go back to the modifiers, we can say that we only want it to affect the dragon. Now when we bring this back, you can see it changing the rest of the dragon quite clearly, but not the eye socket, that's not moving. So you do sometimes need to have vertex groups like that. Generally speaking, it's only for things like the eyeball or where there's something sticking out of the mesh. I've just noticed that there was one rogue vertex there that wasn't in the group because I selected faces. Should really select vertices because they are vertex groups, not faces. So that was silly of me. So just assign that to the dragon. There we go. And it just moves slightly, so we know that's working. Okay, back to my modifiers and back to making the dragon. And you can see this loop coming around here, that's fine. We can then select from here to here and then just start extruding that backwards. I'm not going to worry too much about the edge flow here. It's not too deep, and I think just allowing these to undulate over the surface should be enough. If I was doing a very detailed job, then I'd be a bit more wary of these. But we can probably get away with just this loop along here and then extruding it over the top. We'll see how it goes. And then we can just adjust some of these so they follow that loop really slightly. Oh, and I've just realized I haven't turned snapping back on. Be very careful of that. Just going to select all these and press G to grab so they actually stick with the snapping. So it looks like they're, because it looks like they're snapping, but actually it's the shrink wrap that was helping them to snap. But when you're trying to move them around and you haven't got snapping enabled, they move all over the place in weird and wonderful ways. So you can see there's not too many blobs coming through here, so we should be okay, like I say, just for this slight undulation here. If we're worried at all and it was coming through, we could slide these across and have another loop cut in there, just so it's got a bit more detail to work with. You can see now I'm trying to sort of think about the lining up of these vertices together, and we probably need to kind of spread out the topology here and here. So if I bring this down to here, we're starting to get a split here, so we're going to have a pole in here. We could even start the pole a bit earlier, so if we press K for knife, bring this up like this, bring this down like this, and then we'll need a split in here. So into edge mode, right click and subdivide. That's probably easier with the polygon tool, to be honest, but you can see how now I've created what's going to be the start of my loop cut going around there. So at this point I'm just going around and starting to join things up, only in the sort of easy spots where it's obvious that they join, and I'll talk a bit more about bits that don't seem to work where you've got a disproportionate amount of faces or edges one side than another. You can see down here that I'm actually reducing some of the topology, using the edge slide to slide vertices into each other, keeping sure that I've got quads and I don't make any triangles in there. You can get away with some triangles, but you just have to try wherever possible to keep it to quads because it's much easier to add loop cut. So I'm kind of avoiding any patches that I see that are awkward and just linking everything up that seems to work. That way, once I get most of the mesh in, I can just make things work by adding in a loop cut or cutting in areas and adding topology where needed. That's why I feel like it's a good idea to make sure you find your edge flow first and then link the areas up that you need to. It's quite a lot of stretch in this particular face here, which I'm a bit concerned about. So I probably need something coming across here. So again, it's just a case of getting the knife tool and almost experimenting a bit with that. So I'll just come across here for now, and you can see that did move quite a bit really. So it's obviously a worthwhile thing to do, and it's getting tighter to the geometry. But we need to tidy up the mesh as well at this point. So let's get out the knife tool, put a cut across here, delete this edge here so we've got a quad, delete this face for now, and I'll put a simple cut in here and drag those vertices into each other. So we've got a triangle here, and I think that's the only one we need to worry about, so we can do a loop cut up there and then start evening these out. That's still causing a couple of problems, so there's more to be done. So it might be an idea if this came down to this pole here. And that's cleaned it up this side. This one stretches a fair bit though. If an area looks really messy, then you can just select those faces and delete them and then tidy up that area. But I think we're going to be okay with this. But there's got to be some sort of marriage between these. Well, this one curves around here, it doesn't need to anymore. And you can see that they link up quite nicely now. Okay, I'm going to see if I can dissolve this edge loop coming down here. It's a bit too detailed in that area, but it does leave me with a triangle at the end, so I need to try and figure out a way of solving that one. I should be able to get rid of this one as well. Control X only works in edge mode, not vertices mode like I was trying to do there. So we've got these two triangles here. So again, it's just a case of Control R to create a loop cut there. And we've now got a quad. So the reason we want quads is you can see I can do a loop cut through these different areas, and it's much easier to build up topology that way. The problem is if you have unusual topology, you can get loop cuts going all the way around your mesh several times, and you want them in nice even loops going around your mesh so you can add topology. Let's say I need extra detail on this horn, I can add one there. But if the topology was off in some way, it might wrap around parts of the mesh that you don't want it to. So here, for example, it's going all the way through the eye and back round the jaw, and that's not particularly good topology. If I were to need to tidy this up, I'd need to have a break in here where it joins the horn, so some sort of different flow of topology going somewhere else would make a lot of sense. I'm not too worried at the moment because I don't think it's going to impact the shape too much. The edge flow you can see is not particularly good in this area, so ideally I need this to have another loop through here, but because the edge flow is bad, it's going in the wrong direction. And that's to do with this area here that's got poles just here and here. So it's all to do with where your poles are and your loop flow and loop cuts. An edge flow going through here and across here looks okay, but somehow I need to tidy this up in here. Now if you look at your edges and you get the statistics, you can go to overlays, statistics here. I've got 8 edges selected, so I know that that's going to work by filling in quads. So I should be able to just select the edges here and fill, and that's working fine. Same here, if I select those, I can see that there's 6, so that should work. But we have to consider how we want the edge flow to go. Do I want it to go up and round here? And if we have a look at the loop cuts and how that's going to work, it's doing alright at the moment. They're going in okay positions across our dragon. That one's a little bit strange, but it's working. So I should be able to either merge these together, so I can M and this, in this case at last, select those two, M and in this case last, and just sort of drag these across. But that's what I mean about edge flow. It's very hard to describe how that works and how it sits together, but you can see what's going on when you try and do a loop cut around your object. How does it fit in and move around? This is absolutely fine, and it's great because it's a cylinder and you can easily fill up the spaces. Again, across the horn is alright, but when it's going around the horn like that and around the face, that's a little bit suspect, particularly this one here that goes around into the eye socket and past it. So that's not a good edge flow, and we should really cut those out. So this looks fairly awkward here. I can fill in here and here, and then we've got this unusual shape here, and we've got to try and figure out how that's going to work. If I join this up, it'll be a quad and a triangle, but that's not actually as bad as it seems. Let's select all these faces and press F to fill, and a cut across here is now a triangle, and then Control R, cross here becomes a quad. Always takes a bit of figuring out and a little while to get your head around those things, but you get there after a bit of practice. Now there is a slight undulation in the dragon's head. If I hide my retopology for the moment, you can see that undulation going down there. So let's bring it back with Alt H and into edit mode. I need a cut in here, comes down to around here, and I'm going to cut back into the center. And then I can press K, and I've got a quad loop going around here, following that undulation. Here looks a little bit odd and tricky, but we can just sort of move this one over and adapt the shape so it starts following the edges around the horn. And then we can just sort of count where we're going, so those are going to match up, and these ones, and then these ones, and you can kind of see where you're headed. I'll turn the mirror off again so I don't start selecting the back side. Now here's quite an interesting one. So I've got this blank space here, and I can see straight away that it's going to be awkward hooking it up. So this loop kind of comes down here and across here, which is a bit of a pain. This one's all a bit of a pain across here. Ideally, I think what I need is actually another loop cut in my horn anyway, because you can see it's not following the shape here particularly well. So a loop cut down here might be helpful. But you can see that's where I'm getting the issue, where it's marrying up with the other one, going around there and doing a loop cut there as well. So we can solve those problems if I select this face and delete it, and then do my loop cut. Can you see how it's sort of merged to the shape a bit more, and we've got a bit more topology to play with? That's actually helpful, and I can start filling these edges in here, and then I can come back to this point here and start thinking about filling those in. So deleting a face to stop that edge flow can be very beneficial. Now you can see that I really need another cut in here to follow this edge loop going around and the flow, which is a little bit of a pain. I don't really want to put a pole in here, but I might actually end up having to do that. So that's the ideal edge flow going around an object like this, because then I can easily add a loop cut in if I need to sharpen things up. But you can see it's not ideal, it's not hitting topology particularly well in this area, so I'm having to do a lot of sort of tidying up and sorting. Here's another case where I need another edge loop going around the base here, so Control R around there, because ideally I don't want my poles to be coming out of here where I might need to add more topology in these areas to sharpen edges up. If that's not making a lot of sense, then look up things like supporting loops and you'll get the idea. There's a bit of twisting there. It's not the best, this one, but it's sometimes a marriage of trying not to fit in too much topology and making things work. It may be that I have to come across here and create another set of topology in here. I'll show you how you can do that. It does add a fair bit though. So I'm doing a cut down here and then into the middle of an edge, and then background here, and then into the middle of another face. So I've got an extra edge loop going around here. It helps me out because of all this undulations in here. And then we go in and join those last edges, so we've got quads. To be honest, I wouldn't really do this if I wasn't doing a tutorial, but I'm just trying to show you the best way, as I see it, of doing these things if you have to add if you've got sort of big stretchy bits like this that you need to adapt and sort out, and you want it to work in high poly objects. So now I've got that bit of extra topology that will help me to sort out the shape so I don't get those bulges coming through in places. Not sure this is the best way for this particular model, but it is working. Okay, so again we've got an area here that we need to fill in. Let's have a look at how many edges that is. So it's 8 edges, we know it's going to work, we just have to figure out how it's going to work. So let's start just evening it out slightly, which might help us. And if we turn it into kind of a circle, then it's usually a little bit easier to see where we can go and where we have to adjust it. Just adjusting a few areas around here as well. I'll do that in a second. So back to this area here. You can always try selecting an edge on the outside of the circle and press F to fill, and that will fill in a quad. That will fill in a quad, and then we've got a quad at the end there. So sometimes these things are simpler than they seem. Again, I'm not saying this is the best topology, and I'm not the world's most expert at retopology, but hopefully it will help some beginners out there to figure out where they might be going wrong. And sometimes it's just a case of finishing off a mesh in the best way possible and with the knowledge you've got available. So I'm trying to give you shortcuts and hints to achieve those goals. Now this area needs a bit more topology, doesn't it? Especially coming around these sections here. So we could see what it looks like just filling in. But you can see there's an area across here that's going to cause us problems, an area just there that's going to cause us problems. Now it may be the case that you can just select a few and then I to inset, so you just got those extra faces just to help you out if you need to sort of cover an area like that. And for that case it's working. It'll probably work on this one as well, so we'll probably continue that trend. I'll scale this up a bit first and then inset. And I'm pressing G to grab at the end of it, so it definitely snaps to the shape that I want, utilizing the snapping option that's enabled. So seeing as that's working, I will continue it across to the end. Now let's say you wanted an extra line in here. Well, we can always cut one in using the knife tool. Got an extra cut there, so I'll just have to go back to that. And we can cut it in this way, and then if we need to, come back down this way. And then the last cut is from here to here, J to join, and we created a cut there. Although actually that's not ideal, we need to work on this lump a bit more. So add to this cut there, and I'll come round this one as well, and then finish it off down here instead. And that's easy enough then to dissolve these edges. Control X, vertex mode, join these two up with J, and I've got an accidental one there, so Control X to dissolve that. Now I've got this extra topology here that will help me to sort out this area around here. Something's gone slightly wrong in here and it's difficult to say what it is, so isolate the shape, zoom in on that area, and we've got this extra vertex there that I can press Control X to get rid of, and now we can see it's working alright. Now this naturally comes into a point here. So if I extrude those, just watch they don't bump into each other, as in join in the center with the mirror. And now for the end, if I extrude these sections out, and then if you start to bring these sections around, you can see how you can start to join the topology together in the middle. So if I grab a vertex here, E to extrude, and then we've got the face there, E to extrude this one, and you can see how that comes around the corner now, and we've still got the quad topology. I'll certainly need more cuts in here, but you can see the idea of where we're going with that. And it's often the case where you've got a lot of topology going into a small amount, so a big area into a small area, that you'll need to do these sort of slow progressions inwards. Now you can see that there's too many loop cuts now in this area here, There's no need for that many, so somehow we've got to merge them into each other. So it's doing the same method as we do here, where we're trying to bring them into each other. So if I select this one, GG to edge slide, and this one, GG to edge slide, then press Ctrl R for a loop cut in here, and I'll scale that down. We can then get rid of this loop cut and this loop cut here. I made a slight mistake because that's on a pole, but that's alright. We can press Ctrl X to dissolve those, and then I can bring these ones over, GG to edge slide. And you can see how we've reduced that topology now. So I'm trying to split this up so I've got more topology around here. So I've extruded this way instead of going up to join these two together. And that's created 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of 1, 2 if I just continued those on. Probably going to have a mismatch between these, but that's okay. We'll go for the top one for now and then delete where necessary later on. Okay, so this is quite dense in here, and we need to reduce it. I'll just see what's going to happen up here, so I'll just see what the marry up is across here. So we've got one extra loop cut. We might be able to just get rid of one of those for now, and then just even things out slightly. I think we're going to get away with that, so that shaves off one. So just time-lapsing the last bits of me filling in. There is a point here where I'm not too happy with the topology. There's a lot of edges going into a small amount of edges, so I should have broken down that a bit better, especially as I had the chance earlier to go around the nostril rather than down towards the horn, so that would have been a bit better than the big pole I had at the bottom. And there we go, we finally got there. There's a few areas that probably need a bit of tidying up, so we're going to have to move these around slightly so that it doesn't overlap too much. And at this point, that's when you can start thinking, do I need another loop cut anywhere? Some of these horns look like they need a little bit more topology. So I'll just turn snapping on and edge slide those ones along. Need to fill in the space at the back. But we also need to think about a few areas along here where we can try and make this topology fit a little better. So it's just a case of going around and tidying up where you see necessary. Here, for example, you could do another loop cut around there to sort out the topology. It doesn't add too much in terms of the face count, so we're okay there. Watch out for these bits. You can see there's two verts in there. It hasn't quite clipped together with the mirror. There is a tool, vertex, smooth vertex as well, that might help here as well, and that seems to be doing a good job, so I'll leave that at that sort of detail. Okay, a long old process. It took me 3 hours in total. Obviously I'm explaining as I'm going along, and there's sort of tutorial recording and things like that, but probably about 2 hours. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.